I'm Miwa Messer. I'm the producer and host of Poured Over. And Daniyal Mueenuddin is on the road right now touring for This Is Where the Serpent Lives. And this is the beauty of technology because usually he's based in Pakistan and Oslo, Norway. So hello, Florida. Hello, Daniyal. I'm really happy to see you. This book is gorgeous, though. And anyone who's read your story collection, In Other Rooms, Other Wonders, knows that you love a gorgeous sentence. But you are taking us to present day Pakistan. This is not autofiction. I do want to be straight up about that. This is not autofiction. But it's been almost 2 decades since the story collection. And I'd really like to start there with the behind the scenes.
Yeah,
And
yeah. I've been debating what I'm gonna say because it's kind of personal.
yeah,
But the reason I want to say what I'm about to say is that I refuse to acknowledge that this is a this is a, how do you put it? Well, I'll just say it. In 2009, right before I was up for the book award,
hmm,
National Book Award, which really made me happy. I'm glad that my mother knew that. For
right.
reasons entirely unrelated to me, she committed suicide. And I adored her, and she's a really cool lady. And she was the reason I became a writer.
Hmm.
She
Yep.
was she herself was a writer, and encouraged me from a very young age and helped me. She was the guiding influence in my life. I
Hmm.
really miss having her as a reader. In any case, I then spent 10 years, which is probably a little bit too much,
Right.
writing this book about her, and trying to just come to terms with her suicide because she was such an important part of who I am, and
Right.
particularly of me as a writer. And it worked. I mean, uh, I do feel that I found some kind of peace there, but the book I wrote, I couldn't seal the deal.
Yeah.
It was I couldn't place her at the center of it where she needed to be, because I couldn't bear to engage with her that closely. And that was a failure. I admit it, as a writer, but it wasn't a failure as a human being.
Right.
And Yeah, so that book is sort of sitting in my drawer to either ripen or rot. And I'm about to write a story about her, a book about her actually. Which
Right.
is not going to be about that, but about it's a love affair. She had a crashing great love affair in her life. She was fortunate. Everybody doesn't get that, and
That's
I'm going to
true.
write about that.
All right. That is a book I really want to read. But in the meantime, two of the first parts of This Is Where the Serpent Lives were excerpted in the New Yorker and Muscle and Golden Boy. So listeners might be familiar with those two. But what I love about this new book is the structure. You've got essentially four novellas that form the backbone of what can be read either as novellas or as a novel. I chose to read it as a novel the first time, and then I went back and sort of noodled with each of the pieces. And I love this structure, and I just want to start there if we can.
You know, I mean, of course, every writer wants to be an innovator.
Uh-huh.
That's something that we strive for, or many of us do. And I think this is really an innovative structure.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know of another book that's organized the way this one is.
Right.
And I do think that is a virtuous construction
Mm-hmm.
that both it as you say, it reads, you can read it as the New Yorker did, these short stories or novellas. Um, and also, I think it's much more than that. And I love the idea that there are people in Gainesville, Florida, or wherever they may be, who are sort of puzzling over my weird choice and finding, as I say, virtue in it. So yeah.
I mean, I don't think of it as a weird choice so much as it suits the story, right? There's a big cast, but there are five characters that I sort of locked onto. There's Yazid and Rustum and Hisham and Shanaz and Saqib. And I'm going to explain sort of their relationship loosely because you and I are not going to have spoilers in this conversation. But of all of this cast, those are the five that I felt very, very attached to very, very quickly. And Yazid is the first guy we meet, and we meet him as a tiny child, right? And he is in some ways a familiar character, right? He comes from nothing. He is an orphan. He shows up with
Oh, he's
shoes.
Falstaff.
He's
You know
Falstaff.
Falstaff.
Okay.
Yeah.
All
Go
right.
on.
So let's
Sorry.
start. Yeah, but let's start there. Let's start with him. I mean, he is a great opening. He is, I mean, he's the outsider who brings us along. I mean, I know what I've read about Pakistan, right? Like I have not spent time there, but I immediately recognize this guy and I want to be in his orbit.
This is a universal character. I mean, it's a character that's appeared throughout fiction, and
Hmm.
of course, each iteration of that character is
Hmm.
unique in a way. But it's a character that everybody loves. We love Falstaff. I mean, Henry I too, Shakespeare. For your readers who are not familiar, um, he comes to the two plays are supposed to be about the King Henry, and instead he's so prominent. He just refuses to fit inside that that be restrained that way, and we love him. I mean, I first read that when I was in high school, and I was just like,
Hmm.
wow, what a great character. And then
Hmm.
I was fortunate that I have this character in my life. He's a guy. He's my longest serving employee. He's worked for first my father and then for me for more than 60 years. And I just love the man. And we have had some crazy adventures. And he is if I can say it,
You can swear. I don't have a problem with
he's one mofo.
that.
He saved my life twice.
Right.
That's significant. He's now old, so he can't do it anymore. But we used to go up in the mountains together in Pakistan, and there's some pretty crazy people up there.
Hmm.
So he's huge. This man is just physically large, um, and uh, and that is very useful when you're confronted with people who are unfriendly. Um, so yeah, he's a great guy, and
Hmm.
and and I knew right as a child, I knew that this guy is bigger than life. He really is. So I love him, and I love the character.
It's great because the character, he's ambition personified in a lot of ways. I mean, he
Totally.
knows that he's got to make his own way. And you're writing about a society that is so class driven and it is so modeled after colonialism in ways that it's just like, oh, right, we're still in the present day, we're still in the 21st century. And yet, colonialism has not let go. And it's partially because the community itself is perpetuating colonialism. It's like, well, the Brits are gone, but at the same time, there are members of the society that are continuing the behaviors they saw before.
Well, let me say one thing
Hmm.
that in a way the history of Pakistan is the history of our receding from colonialism.
Yeah.
That we've look, colonialism. People say it's that it's just a negative thing, but
Right.
the Brits showed up in England, sorry, in Pakistan in the 1600s, and they started by being very corrupt
Right.
under the East India Company, which was the prevailing atmosphere, the culture. And
Hmm.
then they came along and they cleaned it up and they made this country run. The
Hmm.
trains ran on time. And my father was a product of that. He was a member of the what's called the ICS. It was the
Okay.
steel backbone of there were 1,000 men that ran India, only a
Hmm.
thousand, and he was one of them. And good or bad, and my dad was much more negative than I am. He thought that because he'd experienced the
Right.
racism of the Brits. I've never experienced that except when I was in school, but I sort of briefly did experience it. Because back in the 80s when I was at school, I went to prep school there, what they call public school there for 1 year. And these guys are racist, but they also made the trains run on time.
Yep.
And nowadays, the trains don't run on time. In fact, the trains are like a disaster, and everything is a disaster. We have no discipline, and we have a culture of corruption, which is basically the old Mughal culture,
Mm,
which has just reappeared. In much more expert people than I can give you a analysis of that will be much more nuanced. Um, but that's what happened. So if you
hmm
talk about colonialism in Pakistan, I refuse to be apologetic for it, even though I'm a Pakistani. And I wish we would return to that some of those virtues because it would mean that our country was run a lot better. I'm severely disappointed and saddened by where we find ourselves.
mm. What are some of the values of, is it just the structural systemic stuff where literally the trains are running on time? That's the kind of thing you're
Yeah,
looking
I mean,
back towards?
yeah, totally. I mean, the downside is they were wildly racist,
Mm, mm,
but and that's an unmitigated bad thing.
right.
But yeah, they cleaned it up. They came there and initially they sort of absorbed the culture and became sort of Mughals almost, as
Right.
great William Dalrymple has told us.
Right.
Um, they decided to not do that, and Queen Victoria and all that stuff, and the English aristocracy, which had principles, and not initially. I mean, Elizabethan England was a very different matter. Those guys were as corrupt as anybody, but um, but they did clean up their act, and I wish we
Right.
could clean up our act.
Part of why I mentioned at the top of the show that this is not autofiction is there's a character whose biography, and not just Yazid, but there's a character called Rustam who shares a bit of your biography. You were educated in the States, you went to Yale Law, you have an MFA from Arizona, you did prep school at New England somewhere, I'm forgotten, right?
Yeah, Grudden.
Okay. So you've done sort of that piece of it. You go back to Pakistan to work on your father's farm and run his farm. And this is not a casual hobby farm. This is an
Yeah,
agricultural
yeah,
business.
yeah.
But Rustam, I mean, he shares that background with you, and then you go from there because obviously the point is to tell a story. But there's he too, like Yazid, is this entry into this story where it's this sort of classical East versus West, right? Like this is the Wild West. He is in the Wild West. And
Yeah,
he is fully unprepared for this.
I live in the Wild West. I
Okay.
love it. I love it. But it can get a little, how do you say, heated at times. But
Right.
but yeah, it's interesting because of that. Pakistan is like a drug, and particularly where I live is like a drug
Okay.
because once you've lived in that atmosphere of tension and
hmm
of striving against uh, uh, how do you put it? A non-rule based economy, and
Right.
there are all kinds of it's very tribal, and
hmm
it's tribal in ways that some of it is wonderful and some of it is a little less wonderful. But I even love the less wonderful parts,
Yeah.
which is the guys who are trying to accomplish things that are outside the rules, even the rules that exist. So yeah, it's all fun, and I'm fortunate. I've been at it for 40 years, and
Right.
um, and I've got a wonderful group of people who are, I've selected them over 40 years, and these
hmm
really nice guys who've helped me to understand the place, and that's why I'm able to write about it.
Yeah.
So I'm very fortunate in that, but it is it can get a little it can get a little weird.
Yeah, but it's great to read about. Rustam, though, I mean, he's such a city person. He's such a city person. And we meet his cousin Hisham and Hisham's wife, who are also very much city people. And, again, sort of a classical story trope, right? City people, city mouse, country mouse, all of this. And watching them navigate their relationships to each other, as well as their relationships to staff and the people who live around the farm and on the farm, and watching them navigate class and also the performance of power, right?
Yeah.
Like, I mean, the perception of power and the performance of power. It's almost theatrical. I mean, I love this idea of Yazid as Falstaff because, I mean, he's not the only character who's living sort of as this larger than life piece of the
Well,
story.
I'm fortunate in that
Mm,
if you were living in Brooklyn, you wouldn't have your range, your register would be smaller.
right.
Um, uh, I'm fortunate in that because of where I live and because of these sort of very hirsute characters that I am privileged to engage with.
Hmm.
I've got a big story. Um, and I mean, that's lucky. I mean, Tolstoy writes War and Peace about Napoleon, more or
Hmm.
less. I mean, of course,
Hmm.
there meant much else, but that's just a huge story. I mean, I wish I had. Well, I don't wish because it was a terrible tragedy. But troubled times make good literature, and I've lived through troubled times in Pakistan. And, I'm heartbroken by some of the stuff that happens. And I'm particularly heartbroken because culturally, we didn't have to be this way. But
Right.
but we are, and it makes for good stories.
But also the way you cut back and forth in time with all of these characters and the four sections of the book. I mean, you're starting, if I remember correctly, really we're getting our footing in the 50s. And then again, sort of the 70s were such a tumultuous moment around the globe, if you think about it, right? Iran, Pakistan, China, the Korea,
Hey,
South Korea, all of it, right?
let's not forget the music.
Well, of course, the music. We are coming back to the music, but I love the idea that you're playing with time and you've given yourself the freedom to jump as you need to serve the story more than a timeline. And I'm wondering if we can just talk about that structural choice too, in the context of how your characters get to it changes the way they connect with their community. It changes the way they connect with place. It changes the way they connect with each other. I mean, time is not quite a character in its own right, but it is a big determining factor in what unfolds for this cast.
You know, I lived through the 70s in
Hmm.
Pakistan. I was just a kid,
Right.
but I got to experience that at very close range,
Hmm.
partly because my father was engaged. He was a government official.
Right.
And my mother was, this American, crazy, wonderful broad who was who showed up in Pakistan and was trying to figure it out. Um, but it was a time of real hope, and we need to remember that the hope was dashed because the politicians were corrupt, but they at least used the rhetoric of hope, and nobody's done that before or after in Pakistan.
Right.
And so yeah, it was a really exciting time, and in a way, I think that my book sort of approaches the 70s and then recedes from the 70s,
Hmm. Hmm.
just as I have done in my life.
Yeah.
And if I were to say that there's some aspect of Pakistan that does give me hope, it's that, because that's a cultural memory that is, part of, the DNA of people. And, there are old guys in my farm who remember that.
Right.
And and they that aspect of that the peasantry, as we call, as you can call them, I hope that's not derogative. Um, the peasantry still have that in their DNA. And,
Right.
the reason that I'm able to engage the way I do at my farm is because that's in the DNA. And there's a longing for, equality, which is, systemically not supported, but that is, well, maybe it's that all people long for that, but I think that also it's there. It was embedded there.
Hmm.
And, if you look at the history of India, as we were, Pakistan's new creation, that
Right.
wasn't there. There's never been a moment in India where the peasantry and the poor and the dispossessed were
Hmm.
able to say, "Look, we have a rights too to sit at the table and eat,
Mm.
eat. We don't have to get the crumbs that are thrown off the table. We can have a place at the table." And I hope that ideology. I'm not an ideological writer, but I
Hmm.
hope that ideology is both in my book, and also I hope someday we will achieve that.
Right. Well, and I'm thinking too about how you bookend Serpent, and I shorten titles all the time. So this
No,
is
I
where the
like
Serpent
Serpent.
lives is a
I like
great,
Serpent.
great title, but I use Serpent. So,
Yeah, I
but
love it.
you bookend the Serpent with Yazid and then this other kid, Saqib, who they are sort of they run parallel tracks. They are both ambitious. They are both attempting to make more of themselves in a society that keeps saying to them, we're not so interested. Their approach is slightly different, which is part of the fun. But I love this bookend of these two guys. And then they end up with very, very different results. But I think
Well, by the
too,
way,
yeah,
can I just put a
of
footnote
course.
there? We don't know where Yazid ends up. Remember, he's just a kid. He's in his 20s when book ends. Who knows where he's
True.
going to be? This guy may be sitting, there's a Pakistani guy sitting in Florida, actually, where I am right now,
Yeah.
who is a billionaire. Who
Yeah.
knows where this dude is going to end up? Right, he may have a little hiccup, but that doesn't mean that I don't think he's beaten, but, I think he's strengthened. He's annealed, as they say,
Yeah.
by what happens in my book. So let's not count him out.
Well, I was just going to say, I actually haven't totally counted him out, but I think in the structure of the story, what you've given us, um, the counterbalance is really interesting because in some ways you've got Yazid who's like, well, yes, I'm very ambitious and I want to do all of these things, but he knows the structure is there. And he holds Rustam and Hisham's wife very close. And the system that he knows, he holds close, but he knows too that it's not quite enough. Whereas Saqib really kind of wants to blow the whole thing up. He's just like, all of this is terrible.
Yep.
All of this is terrible.
Yep. Not
And his
all. Not all. I
okay.
mean, he's
Most.
genuinely loves Shanaz.
Yeah.
Shanaz is, somebody who's been, more than just an employer. I
Yeah.
mean, he adores her. And
Yeah.
in a weird way, he even adores Hisham. He wants
Right.
to be them, and
Yeah. Yeah.
what's it called? The sincerest form of flattery is to imitate.
Right.
But he wants to do more than imitate. He wants to be those guys. And I don't think he can probably beat in America, in Pakistan. But as I said, there's a guy sitting here in Florida who owns
Hmm.
the Jacksonville Jaguar football team, or he
Yeah.
used to at least. He's made his money on auto parts. But so that can happen, and I'm sure that I don't know his background. I've never studied him, but I bet
Right.
he didn't come from fancy. I bet he came from he built that thing. And we're proud of him.
Yeah, that's usually how it works, honestly, is that someone says, well, I can't do the thing I want to do here. I'm going to go do it somewhere else if they can
Yeah,
actually
totally.
get out the door. I
Yeah,
think that's part of it. But you too, I mean, you live in Pakistan and Norway. You have been educated in the United States. You were a practicing lawyer in the US for a moment too. I mean, you really do live this bifurcated life that
but I'm not like this guy who's the auto part.
no, 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 no. Not saying you're like this guy, but you have built a thing that not everyone might have built. And I mean, what is that like switching gears for you? I mean, you're an outsider in some ways, but you're an insider in other ways. I mean, you're constantly sort of having to code switch, it seems like.
That's why I can write about it.
Hmm.
you know, because I'm fortunate privilege to be able to understand the rhetoric on this side as well as on that side. And therefore I can, I mean, look in my book, I hope that the dialogue is fairly convincing.
Yeah.
Um, but that dialogue is not that's not the language I speak when I'm over there.
Right.
Um, you know, I sometimes amuse myself by translating the dialogue, not when I'm writing it, but afterwards. Like all writers, like to reread my work sometimes, or not
Yeah. Yeah.
often. And I love being able to. I love the practice of sitting there and trying to figure out, okay, what would this guy actually say, in
Right.
Urdu or in Punjabi, more likely.
Okay.
So yeah, that's fun.
I mean, the sense of place that, and again, I have not been to Pakistan, but I've read enough. And I feel really grounded with these characters. And they feel there's a universality to your characters that I love that keeps me sort of locked in with them as we're telling these stories about, in some cases, fancy parties. There is some violence, though. There is unexpected violence, but then there's also just the reality of doing business in a place that is the Wild West. I mean, it really is. But for you, I mean, you're moving between time periods. You're moving between Lahore and the farm, and you're moving between different places and different classes. And do you have a moment where you just want to stop and say, I'm here in this book. I don't want to move anywhere. I don't want to change time. I just want to sit with this moment or this scene or this character. Or are you always thinking about it as a whole?
I'm privileged.
Mm-hmm.
I have the luxury of doing exactly that. I can reside
Okay.
in a place and a time, and of course it's temporary. But writers. I mean, what we do is we sit in a quiet room or a loud room. I
Mm.
actually like noise. I'm
Okay.
like Chekhov in that. Chekhov used to, and I hate to have been so constantly compared to him, and I'm a little sick of it. But Chekhov was a crazy man. He had this weird family. He loved to sit in a corner of his, dining room. He wasn't wealthy, and
Mm-hmm.
have his crazy family making lots of noise. Um, and I like that too.
No, it's more a matter of having the luxury of being able to sit with the idea. I mean, you're not writing a polemic, obviously, but your characters are influenced by the world they live in. But for you as the writer, I mean, do you have moments where so much happens in this book? Do you ever just want to step back and sit with like one thing for 1 minute or one character for 1 minute and not constantly be in motion?
I'll spend a week or even a month
Okay.
with one character.
Okay. Can you say more about that? I mean, who showed up first? Like when you're working with this cast, I sort of feel like, you know, Yazid and Rustam are the two, not just because of your own life, but I felt the most grounded with them. And it's because I'm coming from this as a Westerner, right? Like I grew up in the States. This is my experience of the world. Um, but I feel like they were sort of your entry points into the whole thing. Am I right about that?
Well, they're the entry points in that they begin the book.
But
The
beyond that.
Well, the story that I've been thinking about the longest is obviously Bayazid, just because I've known him all my life. This is a guy
Hmm.
who I was a little boy, and he was, he's 15 years older than me.
Right.
I've always loved the guy. He taught me to drive,
Yep.
and we used to go out hunting in the desert together for antelope. And so this guy was, we were buddies from the
Hmm.
beginning. But the story that kind of, I sort of feel a little bit like that, now that this book has been out for about, a week or something.
Hmm.
And I'm finding that the readers are less engaged with Saqib. And yet that was the story that, I thought it was sort of crowning the book. Um, because it's the
Yeah.
longest.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
look, I concede that he may be, I guess he's less sympathetic, maybe, but I think his story is certainly contemporary Pakistan is
Mm.
the story.
Yep.
And it's the story that gives me hope because he's a guy who, you know, despite the structural difficulties of success or rising,
Hmm.
he's going to get there. I think so. I'm
Right.
not. I probably won't write about him again, but
Hmm.
he's a guy who I believe in him. You know,
Right.
he's a guy who. So yeah, I mean, of course, Bears had this, but there's limitations to this Falstaff character. I mean, the
Right.
problem with Falstaff is that he's larger than life. And
Hmm.
we love that. But I mean, even the original, my friend is called, I was gonna call him Afrasiab, but that's his real name. Uh, and I talked to him, he knows, as I say, we talk about everything. And I said, look, I'm writing this story about you, and I promise it's
Mm.
very, very full of praise. But would you mind if I use your name? And he said, no, no, you must use my name, because I want to be famous. Um, and then I thought, well, poor old Afrasiab, he doesn't quite know what he's getting into, maybe. And I don't want people in Islamabad sort of gawking at him. So I changed the name. but he's certainly I don't know what to say about him. I guess I've said something, but I could keep writing about him forever.
I would keep reading about him too, but I want to go back to Saki for a second because I didn't find him unsympathetic. I found him very much a product of his time and place and his situation, and I thought he was fascinating. And then there's a moment too where the gig is up because of you know what I'm talking about, and obviously we're not going to spoil it, but it's a great mo. It's a great moment. It is just, and it's a millisecond of, oh, dude, oh, my guy, you did that.
Mm.
Um, but I'm kind of fascinated by the fact that people aren't necessarily connecting with him. Because again, for me, even though the book is structured as four novellas, I felt like I needed that last piece, not as a counterbalance, not as I needed to know who this guy was. I just wanted to know how everything fits together because you do this thing where there's always a thread running behind with each of the four pieces. Like again, I know they can stand as novellas, but there's this constant sort of pulsing in the back or someone shows up very quickly and you're like, "Oh, hi, I was wondering where you were." Like you're back.
You know, the thing is that um, even books which describe terrible times,
Mm.
there has to be hope. Otherwise, I mean, I believe in hope. I think that,
Hmm.
ultimately human beings are good people, are good, and that they're,
Hmm.
we act badly sometimes. Um, so that when I put old Saqib in this book, I meant it as a affirmation of the
Hmm.
power of life and the power of the thing we're good at, is the thing that we Pakistanis are good at is we are resilient. You
Hmm.
can put us anywhere. And you know, I've as you know, I have a whole Wisconsin aspect of my life. Um,
Hmm.
and about 10 years ago, I was driving to my farm, and
Hmm.
the house wasn't, the heat wasn't turned on and all that kind of thing. So I was like, okay, I'm just going to stop at this little motel right next to my farm. It was 20 minutes away,
Hmm.
and I go in there, and it's a Pakistani, and we start chatting, and I said, "Where the heck did you come from?" And he gives me this lovely story about how and now he owns this motel. It must be worth a couple of $1 million.
Right.
So even there, these guys have you know I wouldn't say proliferated. Well, I bet he had a bunch of kids.
Well,
Um,
but it's a diaspora kind of thing, right? I mean,
Totally.
it's you will meet people from Pakistan anywhere in the US,
We are delighted to just blend in.
become part of the thing that you're now
Yeah,
situated in. So it's more of like living in the present than it is necessarily being beholden to the past, it sounds like.
totally. But remember our past. I mean, when you look at Pakistan, we were
Mm,
founded in 1947. And
right.
that's really important to us. We are culturally attuned to the fact that our culture, it's very old, but it's also very new
Yeah.
because we were hived off India,
Hmm.
and that matters to us. We care.
Yeah. You also, though, I mean, I love this part of your story. Yes, you had a law degree from Yale. You were a practicing lawyer, and then you were like, you know what? I just want to go write. And you end up at the University of Arizona's MFA program, which is a really great program. But you really just kind of said, I don't want to do this other piece anymore. And yeah, the farm's in the background, and you're not ready to go and do that full time. And but how did you make the decision to say, well, I don't want to do this other thing. I'm just going to go write. I mean, that's a big commitment. And you weren't young when you did it.
Mm. It, you know, they say about the law firm that I was in, it was called Debois and Plimpton, and they say that's sort of the law firm with a human face,
Mm.
like Central Europe. Um, and there were great people there. I was privileged. I don't know if you know the work of Louis Begley. He's a writer, and he
I read
wrote
him years ago. It's been a
he
minute
wrote
since I read him.
one brilliant book, which is called Wartime Lies.
Yeah.
it's a work of genius. But anyway, I worked with Louis, but mostly, I was like one of his, his little his gophers. It was very funny because I'm a little bit older, so I'm a little bit less flexible. So when I started working for Louis, uh, he one day he he chastised me, let's put it, and I told him
Hmm.
to go sit on it. It's quite a funny story, let me tell you. So I've just started working. Louis had his like he was the senior partner. He
Oh,
was the
yeah.
most senior partner at the law firm, and he was also a huge rainmaker.
Yeah. Yeah.
He was himself a man of stature that was beyond this law firm, and also an excellent writer. Um,
Hmm.
so so Louis one day we're working on some deal, right at the beginning, and he decides that he's going to lose his temper, which he did it very controlled. I mean, he would know what he was doing. So I went downstairs and I went to the assigning partner. I said, "I'm never talking to that man again."
Right.
Um, and my phone rings, and in those days, the phone you showed who was calling.
Hmm.
It said Louis Begley, um, and he had the most purring voice.
Hmm.
He called me up and says, "Daniel, are you free for lunch?" So I said, "Yeah, I guess I am." I was still pissed off, but I couldn't
Right.
say no. It would be impolite to say no. So he takes me to this little boîte with excellent French food where they knew him
Hmm.
very well.
Hmm.
And we sit down in this, it was a garden. They had a garden. It must have been in the summer. We sit down. He's impeccably dressed,
Uh-huh.
um, with just right dressed. And we sit down in the corner of this little boîte. More the sort of place you take a woman than a junior, more than a junior associate in the law firm. And he sits down and he says, "Would you have some wine?" So I thought he was just going to order a glass of wine. Instead of which, he orders a bottle of wine. And it's, noon. So we start talking, and he is a mesmerizing talker.
Hmm.
And we talk and talk. And then the man says, "Would you like another bottle of wine?" I said, "Well, I'm not normally in the middle of the day, but since I'm
Right.
sitting with Louis Begley," he orders a second bottle of wine. We sit there till 4 in the afternoon, have a cigar, which is like the ultimate. And then we go back to the law firm. And then I was devoted to him after that.
Yeah.
And we had a lot of fun. And he was a genius at lawyering. I mean, he was a good writer, but he was an
Mm.
equally excellent lawyer. I had a lot of fun, but with him. But then, I remember there was something about the building. It was like this huge black thing in Midtown. And I
Yeah.
remember walking in one day, and I was working all the time. I was working,
Hmm.
100-hour, 120-hour
Yeah.
weeks. Um, and I just looked at this. I was walking in. It was like 6 in the morning. I'd been there all
Hmm.
night, and I'd just
Yeah.
gone home to change. And I looked at this building, and I thought, Jesus, I'm working in this thing. Then that was like, then I applied to the MFA program, and the MFA program was fabulous.
Right.
These guys were, really nice people, really serious about fiction and poetry,
Hmm.
and they gave me both. They gave me a place where I felt comfortable to. I was learning the craft of fiction because I'd never written fiction before. All
Right.
I'd written was poetry, and they gave me these 2 years, and I'm so grateful to them.
Well, and then that's when we get the story collection, correct? That's the body of work you were
Yeah,
doing
well,
while you were.
I was like, how it is when you start something and you're
Hmm.
joyous. I
Yeah.
wrote like 30 stories. And in that 2 year period, I was just going bonkers.
Hmm.
Um, and out of that, we were able to pull eight, but I bet I could pull another eight out of there. I
Right.
won't probably, unless I get old and lacking in energy. But yeah, it was really really great, and I'm so grateful to them and to
Right.
the fact that it turned out that I could do this thing.
Remind me where the first story was published.
It was published in Zoetrope of all
That's the
places.
right. That was the
Isn't that
magazine. I
weird?
I was about to say Grand Street, and I'm like, I don't think I'm right about that. But Zoetrope, yeah, no, there used to be this kind of plethora of small literary magazines that, like, they were just the most interesting. amalgamation of like stuff that you just wouldn't, but the language was always great. Like the writing was just always spot
and the art.
on. Yeah, it was
Um,
always just great.
yeah, and that was kind of a vanity thing for Francis Ford Coppola.
Mm-hmm.
He put up the money because these things always lose money or
Mm-hmm.
did lose money. Now they hardly exist. Yeah, and I was sitting and I'd been sending out work for several years and
Uh-huh.
getting nice little notes from people. And I
Mm-hmm.
remember I was sitting in Islamabad, and we were going off on a hiking trip up in the mountains. So
Yeah.
the house was like full of gear and backpacks and ropes and all kinds of crap. Um, and I was there with my then wife, when she was going to come with me, and she also liked to go up in the mountains. Um, and I got this email from Zoetrope, and I remember
Mm.
opening it and just being like, "Oh my God, I've been published. I'm going to be published." And it was just so I've never felt even other, I've been fortunate to have other people who liked my work.
Mm-hmm.
But that was the glory,
Yeah, yeah.
the first one. Um and yeah, and then so I published that story in Zodrip, and then I went to the writing program in Provincetown. They have that
Mm-hmm.
lovely, lovely program. And lady contacts me from Riverhead Books and says, "Do
Mm-hmm.
you have any more stories?" So I said, "Yeah, I've got a bunch, and I send you some." So I sent them all these stories, much more than it was in the book. Um,
Right.
and there was a lovely guy named Salvatore Scribona who was running the program. So I'm obviously very thrilled by this whole situation.
Mm-hmm.
And I go down to Salvatore, and I'm like sort of jumping up and down with excitement. And he says to me, "You are not going to communicate with Riverhead anymore because I'm going
Right.
to put you in touch with my agent, and he's going to manage all this. And
Yep.
so you have to go radio silent." So I got in touch with. I've been fortunate, lovely people. Bill Clegg is a
Yep.
agent in New York, so he takes me out to a very fancy lunch. I went down to New York. The fanciest lunch he's ever given me, by the way. I have to, um, the first and was the best. I remember we went to this French restaurant, I think it was, and I had what's that called? Sole, because that's a
Mm-hmm.
sole is something you never cook at home. You'll only be cooked in a restaurant. So we sat there, and then he hooked me up, and
Right.
he immediately started putting my stories in the New Yorker, which was kind of
Yeah.
better than Zoetrope even.
I'm laughing at this Louis Begley story because Wartime Lies, I haven't read that I mean, I read it sort of in my late teens, early 20s when I went through a big sort of phase of, Louis Auchincloss and Louis Begley and all of that. You
Yeah.
also are quite fond of James Salter, and I thought this was a nice moment to
Ooh,
drop in Salter.
wow.
So I went noodling around into A Sport and a Pastime, which I had not read in a really long time. Similar period. Basically, I did all of these sort of, you know, you I read in trends, or at least I used to read in trends when I was younger and had a little more free time. But Salter holds. He really holds up. You like guys who know their sentences.
Yeah. You know what? I've never done this before, and I
Hmm.
maybe not do it again.
Right.
Um, I called up Bill and I said, "Hey, Bill, you must know James Salter."
Yeah.
And he said, "Yes, I do."
Yep.
And I said, "Well, I'm going to go and see James Salter.
Hmm.
I'm going to actually take the trouble to fly. He was living in Aspen, had a beautiful
Hmm.
house. So I said, I'm going to go to Aspen. I want to meet this guy. Um,
Yeah.
so I get my boots on. I think I said to my agent, "Can you hook me up with something over there?" And they had this like writers thing in Aspen. So he said, "Okay, I'll get you into that." So
Yep.
then I'm in Aspen, and I call him up or send him an email and say, "Hey, I want to come see
Um,
you." And he's a gentleman.
hmm.
Now he's now died, but he was a gentleman to the tip of his
Right.
fingers. So he said, "Yes, come, and I'll give you a glass of wine." And we sit down, we talk about everything under the sun, for a couple of hours, mostly about books, I suppose.
Hmm.
And at the end of it, I said to him, I'm embarrassed to do this, but I'd like you to give me some advice because then I was, just starting out, and I'd published one book, and I wanted to get his wisdom because I believe he was wise.
Hmm.
And he said, you know what he said to me? Best
What?
advice I've ever gotten. He said,
Hmm.
you have to stay fit. You've got
Hmm.
to exercise. And the reason is that you've begun writing your career late in life.
Hmm.
And if you want to be a proper writer with some achievement to your name, then you are
Hmm.
going. He was like 80 years old. He'd been rock climbing like 2 days ago.
Oh, I read that novel. I read the
Yeah,
novel
that's
he wrote
Solar
about the rock
Faces.
climbers.
Solar Faces, yeah. Great, great book. I love that. I think it's the best book about rock climbing. Anyway, he'd been rock climbing the day before, and he
Mm.
said that, and I took that to heart. I was like, okay, I came for advice and I've received advice. Um, and I will try to to honor that you gave me this time. So
Hmm.
I've tried to do that.
Okay, that's a piece of Salter I didn't expect in terms of advice, but it makes a ton of sense. It makes a ton of sense. Um, have you started working on the next thing? Do
I
you have
have,
the new project?
yes, well, I don't know how much to tell you because sometimes if you can
Mm,
talk out a work of fiction. You
hmm.
say so much about it that you don't need to say it in words, written words. But I will tell you a little bit about it.
Okay.
Um, so my mother, showed up in Pakistan in 1960, and uh, how to put this? Um, she, having been with my father for
Hmm. Hmm.
8 years, love has a history. Love goes up and down. And I think that in a way that she loved him and she continued to love him. He visited her even when she moved to America. He would come and stay with her.
Hmm.
So he loved her and she loved him.
Right.
But love has a beginning and an end.
Yeah.
And she meets this guy who, well, I don't know what to say about him because in my book he's going to be a different character. But in any case,
Hmm.
this gentleman was the largest personality I've ever known, or one of the
Yeah.
two or three largest personalities. And at the time he was living, according to her, and I'm sure it was true, he was a great sportsman, which I admired in him.
Uh-huh.
He was a great hunter and fisherman. Uh, there's a kind of fish which is the hardest fish to catch in Pakistan. It's called maser.
Okay.
It's sort of like fishing for salmon in Scotland. You will fish for days and not get one.
Uh-huh. Okay.
So this dude was camping by the Indus River and fishing for maser, which the Indus comes out of the mountains nearest Rawalpindi, where these guys lived. So it was they were, a couple of hours away. In a case, she meets this guy and she's fortunate enough to have a great love, which goes on for really her lifetime. But in terms of
Hmm.
the active part of the love, it was like 10 or 12 years. And she told my father about it, before, and I really respect this, that
Hmm.
before the thing began, she went to my father and said, "Look, I've met this person who my father knew very well.
Hmm.
Pakistan is a tiny little place of people who were doing what they were doing.
Hmm.
So she said, I've met this guy and you know him very well. And I'm falling in love. And why don't you and I go live on the farm because he just retired.
Hmm. Hmm.
He was 30 years older than her. So he just retired. And she said, look, let's go live at the farm. And in those days, it was quite a trek to get there because it was overnight train.
Hmm.
And she said, look, I love gardening. I'll set up my garden. I'll make a beautiful garden. And you will, either go into politics or, you know, with local politics, which,
Right.
you could become a member of parliament or whatever. Um, and we'll have a great time. Um, you know what he said?
I don't, but I'm dying to know.
He told me this story, and
Yeah.
she told it me too. He said, I need my polo and my golf and my tennis. And he was a great sportsman.
Yeah.
Um, and he said, I can't, there'll be none of that in where we're going, and I can't give that up. And she said, okay, beat upon your head. Um, and then had this great love affair. And that's what I want to write about. But I'm not gonna use actually the character because his children are still alive. But I've got this other character who's the person I probably admire the most in the world.
Hmm.
He's died many years ago, but he was a relative of mine. He had been ADC to aide de camp to Mountbatten, and
Oh.
then and Mountbatten had some pretty high-powered ADCs.
Hmm.
Um, and then he was ADC to Jinnah, who formed the country. And
Oh.
when Mountbatten was leaving, retired, he's
Mm.
leaving India, he said to Jinnah, "I'll give you two things. I'll give you Pakistan, and I'll give you this chap whose name I'm not going to use." Um, uh, and that was the case. And this guy used to come and stay with us when I was little.
Oh,
And
wow.
so when I went to, I just gotten out of college,
Uh-huh.
and I went to live at my farm.
Hmm.
And it was kind of these guys were actually like planning to kill me, believe it or not. And
Mm.
they were planning to poison me, as I much later discovered. Um, so it was a kind of a tense time. So this
Hmm.
guy he was the founder of the country in a way, this man who I refer to. And he twice came and stayed with me, and I was just a runny nosed kid. I was 25 years old and didn't know, as they say, shit from Shanola. Um, and he came and stayed with me, and that was really important because when a guy like that comes, that's like artillery.
Hmm.
Um, and the people I was contesting with backed off because they
Right.
knew that I could call on him. He could call on anybody. He was
Right.
At one time he held six ministries at the same time, believe it or not.
Hmm.
I don't think anybody's ever done that before or after in Pakistan. So he was minister of six. He held six
Right.
portfolios. Um, so this is a guy who could call down uh, great lightning and thunder if he needed to.
Hmm.
And because of him, I think partly it was he smoothed my way. And it was quite difficult to establish myself in that place because it's quite remote. Um, but because of him, I was able to, partly because of him, I was able to do
Hmm.
that. So anyway, I'm going to write my book, use
Hmm.
him as the principal character, just because I
Yeah.
think he deserves a book.
Yeah.
Um, he was a man of great virtue and absolutely inflexibly virtuous, principled. Um, when I shouldn't identify him, but he was when the war with East Pakistan came between
Mm.
between India and East Pakistan. He
Mm.
was the governor there. He was governor of East Pakistan, and not
Mm.
only was governor, but he was actually governor with full power.
Hmm.
He had full authority, which often governors don't. So
Right.
anyway, when these guys started getting the army started getting all weird and started
Hmm.
shooting people, they killed 1 million people or something.
Right.
He resigned. He said, "I won't do this." Right at the
Right.
beginning, right when this thing started getting ugly, he said, I'm off because he lived in West Pakistan, where I'm
Hmm.
from. So he comes to Pakistan. He and my mom were thick as thieves, as they say. So so mom says, or he says, I don't know who said
Mm.
it. He said, "Let's read Proust together. Well, that's how we're going to get through the war because it was so horrible." So mom and he start reading Proust. But the thing about him, he read
Mm.
it in French. He read Proust in French. My
Mm.
mother was reading in English. Uh,
Right.
so he was that kind of guy. Um, and so I respect him greatly, and I'm going to give him a very prominent place in my book, and that's what I'm writing.
It seems like you have been taking notes for a very, very long time and using material as you needed. I cannot wait to read that book. That is something to aspire to, reading Proust in French, which I'm not there yet, but at some point I do have that first volume translated by Lydia Millay, and I really, really need to get to it. But Daniyal, thank you so much for joining us on Port Over. This has really been a treat.
Thank you very much. It's been a treat for me too.
Thank you for listening. Poured Over is a Barnes & Noble production. To help other readers find us, please rate and review the show wherever you listen to podcasts.